What's going on, beautiful people? Welcome to another installment of the recently released course, Which Way to Wisdom. It is available at zambonifong.com. You can find it, the whole thing there. You can get it in full right now, or you can wait for me to release a whole bunch of different installments here on the podcast. So when I first started, when I realized that astrology was a real thing, then it became clear that astrology implied that the world was constituted differently than I had given it credit for up to that point. And so I spent a few years thinking through what that might mean about what the universe is made of and how the universe functions. And so this module is an exploration of if astrology works, if astrology is the shape of time and shape is in fact the underlying thing that drives the whole cosmos, then what else does that mean? And how can we think about the rest of the world and its nature? And then from that point, the rest of the course will be like, okay, so if that is the nature of the world, then what can we do to make it, to leverage whatever power I have here in my sphere of influence to create the more beautiful world that my heart knows is possible. So this is a module on that kind of thing. If you want to support the production of this kind of work, you can go to zambonifong.com and you can buy the course. You can also just send me a tip via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. I super appreciate all of that. And send it to a friend. Appreciate y'all and enjoy. Yes, beautiful people. Welcome to the next module of the Intro to Spirituality, where we're going to talk about how to navigate the world that we live in, assuming that the world is a big place that where there's plenty of mystery going on. We're going to work on navigation of that big place where there is plenty of mystery going on. But in order to navigate properly, we're going to have to figure out what is going on in the first place. So that's what we're going to do today. Today we are going to work with and define what I think is happening in the world, what I think the world is composed of. So there is plenty of room for me to be wrong here. I don't know. But based on what I can figure out and yeah, well, let's just talk about it. Let's just talk about all the stuff that is going on here. So let's see what I think is happening. So the first thing that we can do here is we gotta interface with Descartes. So the Cartesian idea of like I think therefore I am is great. You know, it is true that there is a point at which you have to realize that everything you think you know is you're sort of like told that and you come to believe it because other people have said so. And so then and then even you can get to a point where you distrust your own senses because you don't have an a priori understanding of what's going on in the world. You only have your sensory explanations for what's going on, and those are inherently inadequate to understand the true nature of a thing and all that. That's real and legit. But that is useless. That gets you nowhere. So, it's the same thing as being like, well, what is energy? I need a definition of energy. And then being like, energy is everything. The end. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't help you. You might be right about that, but that doesn't change anything and it doesn't help you to appropriately navigate the world that you're in. And so we're gonna have to make some assumptions about what's going on. And so one of those assumptions that I'm gonna make is that the world does exist, that there is stuff out in the world that I am participating in, and that it's not all a dream, but there is a collective dream that's going on. There's a sense of consensus reality, and we all participate in the co-creation of this consensus reality. And so the world is not what I think it is, but what I think the world is derived from real information. So, there is
the way that I like to think about this is that I can't see all of the light that exists. I can only see a very narrow spectrum of light that enters my eyes. A bunch of light enters my eyes, and I can only really perceive a narrow uh, spectrum of that light. But the spectrum of light that I can see does exist. That like I can see real light. I can't see all of the light, but I can see some of the light, and there is real information that I can take from that that will help me to understand what's going on in the world. And this is just like true, right? Like this is one of the things that like you see stuff as unless you're blind, but you can like as I light enters your eyes, then that helps you to literally navigate the world that you're in, right? It helps you to figure out what's out here in the world, where stuff is, and helps you to move around in that space, right? And so that's not the only thing that's going on in the world, but it's enough to be able to navigate in the body that I have. And so that is the way that I like to think about information generally is that like I can't know all of it, but I can know what I can know, and that the world is observable. Like there's a bunch of stuff going on in the world, and you can't, your senses, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, all of this, your skin, your sensory, like your touch sensation, all of that is like going to give you real information about what's happening in the world, and it won't give you all of the information. And in fact, all of the information would be incapacitating because all of the information is too much information. It's up to you to decide what is important for you and then move toward that stuff. But the information that you gather from the world by observing it is real information. It's not just something that is made up inside your head. And the way that I think you can know this is because that there is continuity across days. So, and this is distinguished from something like a dream where there can be continuity in dreams, across time, like in the way that like, lots of people report having a particular house that they go to in dreams sometimes, and it is the same house, and they know that it's the same house, and it feels the same to them, and this kind of thing. But what will frequently happen is things will sort of like change shape, and you just have this inherent knowing that it's the same place, and even though it's like shaped differently or looks different in some kind of way or feel or smells different or something like this, but like your sensory perception will change, but you have this inherent sense of knowing that it's the same place. So waking life doesn't follow that model, right? Waking life, for the most part, stuff stays the same across days and time, and when it changes, then it changes at a rate that is that has little to do with one's own internal understanding of what's going to happen. So like if a tree falls, for example, then that is due to the winds that happen, and this is not something that like has to do with what I thought about it, but rather like outside conditions, this kind of thing, right? And so because of that, and for many years up to this point, that tree had stood there for in that same spot, and that continuity shows us that there is a world out there, right? So again, this is not provable necessarily, but it is extremely useful in actually navigating the world. You get to a point where you're like, all right, if I'm gonna navigate the world, I have to assume that there is a world to navigate. And so out there does exist, and it is kind of, is it different than what's going on in here? Sorta, and so we're gonna have to navigate some of that, right? One thing that I think is useful to think with here is that, so in the Zamboni Funk lineage module, I talked about the old religion and how The old religion is the word that Vine Deloria uses to refer to the religion and spirituality that existed prior to colonialism in North America. So, the way that Indians thought about the world before being exposed to Christianity and the war of the colonists and all of that sort of stuff, right? So, in that conception, then humanity is seen as a younger sibling in the world, right? And so there's a sense of like being related to all of the other entities in the world, and that humans are young relative to everyone else. So this sort of like presupposes that everyone else in the world already existed, and then now we're here on the scene. And it's true that we can't prove that the others exist, but it is important to remember that our inability to prove things is in fact a it means that we don't know things, but not that things are not don't exist, right? That's incapacity on the part of the self, and not a it doesn't prove that nothing else exists, right? And so it's good for us to remember that we are young and that we have much to learn. And it is by observing the world that we live in that we come to understand things. Now, it's good to remember always that you can't see the whole thing. And in fact, I think that there is no composite creator deity, or there's nobody at the top who can see the whole thing. I in fact think that I've mentioned that I think that the creation event is ongoing at all times, and that each of us participates in the creation event. And so I don't think that there is a creator who can see through my eyes and understand what I understand, right? But rather, I see through my eyes and I understand what I understand. And that understanding and perception is part of what creates the whole thing, right? And so what this means is that I can't possibly see the whole world, but I can see the world that I live in. And I can observe what I can observe at the scale that I'm at. So that is to say that, the way that I think about it is I think of the Earth as a unit, right? And I am a piece of the Earth, right? I live here on the Earth, but I don't live on the Earth. I live as the Earth. I'm a part of the Earth, right? And the Earth is a larger unit of life. So, and this is the same way that I am a unit of life, and I also have cells, which could be considered units unto themselves, but which are a part of my unified whole, right? And so it scales down in that same way, it scales up in the same way. So I'm a cell in the body of the Earth. The Earth could be thought of as a cell in the body of whatever larger thing is bigger than that. And that thing is probably a cell in the body of a much larger thing bigger than that. And so on, right? Same way if you go down. So I am a cell in the body of the Earth. I have cells, which are cells in my body. Cells have smaller component parts, which make up the cells, and they have smaller component parts. We could get down to the atomic level and the subatomic level, and who knows what's smaller than that. But I posit that it does get smaller than that, and it continues in both directions, right? And so just because I can't observe cells doesn't mean they don't exist. It means that I can't observe them because I'm not at that scale. Cells cannot observe what I can observe because they are not at this scale, right? And so this is the appropriate way to think about observation, is that like I am at the scale that I'm at, and I am able to observe what I can observe, and what I can observe is in fact real. I am observing something. And so so it's up to me to determine what it is that I'm seeing and to be able to navigate at this scale. So, like whenever we talk about perception, it's like very useful to talk about vision and eyes and stuff, right? So, this idea that eyes observe real light that does exist out in the world, right? But you only see this narrow spectrum of light. Well, you see that spectrum of light because that spectrum of light is useful at this scale. It's useful for someone in a body like mine to be able to navigate, right? So this is really important because whenever we are working with a kind of meaning, like we're trying to work toward meaning in some kind of way, meaning is goal dependent. And so it's important for us to remember that what you see is suited to your goals, right? It's the idea of like walking across the room. Well, you're in one spot and you want to be across the room. You want to be over there. And so you like maybe you're looking at the floor to make sure that there's nothing in your way, or you're looking to see if there's furniture around, or maybe you can't walk too good. And so you got to look around and see if you can find a cane or a walker or something like that, right? And so your ability to perceive is dependent on your ability to on your goals. And so if you don't need the cane, then you may well walk right past the cane without seeing it. Even though it is visible, it's technically visible. There's light that's reflecting off of it that could enter your eye, but you don't notice that because you care about your goal. Your goal is to get to the other side of the room. And if the cane is not in your way, then you just keep on pushing. And if it is in your way, then it won't necessarily even look like a cane. It'll look like an obstacle. And so you move it out the way so that or you step over it or whatever, so that you can get to your goal. Goal orientation is essential, and goal orientation is necessarily related to your scale. Whatever scale you're at, it determines what is going to be useful and therefore perceptible to you. You know what you need to know. So again, you are not ever going to be able to see the whole thing. However, you can see what you can see, and you can also understand that you're never going to know the whole thing. You currently don't know the whole thing. And so that means that you are necessarily wrong about a bunch of stuff. You can, by interrogating your own assumptions, by interrogating your own goals and values, right? So like the idea that like you can't see the cane because you are not looking for the cane. You can understand that there is stuff that you can't see because you are not looking for it. And so maybe you can reorient your goals and be like, well, what if I looked for a cane? Would I be able to find one? You can do that kind of thing. You can run these kinds of experiments in order to become less wrong about the world that you live in. It is possible to observe the cosmos in different ways such that you can become less wrong about what's going on in the world. This is the way that you come to develop an understanding of cells, for example, or galaxies and this kind of thing, right? It's the idea of like, well, if I can change the way that I observe, then I can learn new things about the world and I can become less wrong about the way that the world is structured and functions. This is a fundamental concept when it comes to actually navigating the world effectively. It's this idea that I understand that I am mostly wrong, and I understand that I have the capacity to become less wrong by shifting my set of values in order to perceive different things. I can look and see if I can find a cane around. And if I can do that, then what else might I be missing? So, when we're thinking about what the world consists of, I like to use a Taoist understanding of being. and the Taoists call the world, like the way that the world functions, they call it the way. Even just now, I like couldn't say it without saying the way, right? The way that the world functions. And so we're not talking about, again, we're not talking about like the right way, or sometimes Buddhists will talk about like the middle path, right? And so there's the way being, or the middle way, right? Like being the right way to live, or the best way to live, or something like that. And like that's not what the Taoists are talking about. The Taoists are talking about the way simply as the way that things happen, the way that the world goes, the way that the world is shaped, the way that that things fall out in the world, right? There is a way that, and so I like to think about it like a single universal law. Like everything in the world must exist according to the way. And if it doesn't exist according to the way, it simply does not exist, because everything follows the way at all times. There's no way to live without the way. No way, right? It's just what it is. So, and also, like the name, the Tao, right? Like the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao, right? The way that can be named is not the true way, is like a basic foundational concept. This is this idea that like you can't know what the way is, but again, it's observable. You can see how stuff goes and be like, okay, well, there is a kind of consistency to the way that stuff goes out in the world. Sometimes it goes around, sometimes stuff rotates or revolves around the sun or whatever else, right? Moon revolves around the earth, all of that. So there is a way, and so it's up to you to sort of observe and notice what the way is, right? So the way is an archetype, right? So, well, or sort of like the fundamental archetype. So an archetype is a cloud of meaning, which can include many manifestations. So the metaphor that I often use is the road, right? So an archetype is roadness, right? It's the thing that constitutes a road. So not any particular road, right? I live on a street, which could be thought of as a road, or sometimes you go into the woods and there'll be like a trail that has already been walked, that has already been trod, and so you can see that there's like a little road there, and so that could be thought of as a road. Or sometimes you'll have bricks that make a road, or cobblestone, or sometimes they're paved, sometimes they're gravel, but like something about them unifies the idea of what a road is, right? And so that idea of what a road is the archetype that is the road, right? So there are many different forms that a road could have, but they are all unified by this idea of a road, right? So too does the way proceed by myriad forms, right? Like it's this idea that the way is the way, and it shows up in all these different places, in different manifestations, myriad forms, but they all share the way that they exist, right? The way is consistent and it reflects itself all the time. It is, in fact, the reason that metaphors work at all, right? So it's this idea that you can make analogies, or you can say things, you can refer to a thing by referring to other stuff and being like, this is reflective of that stuff over here, right? And so the ability to create a metaphor that will resonate, even though it is not explicitly related to whatever thing you're actually trying to describe, shows that there is a unifying principle which relates things to one another, right? So like that unifying principle is the way. It is good often to think of the way as flow, and it's a good idea to think of, I've mentioned lots of times that shape is sort of like at the bottom of things, right? Shape is the way that stuff differentiates itself and goes about behaving in the world. Stuff behaves according to its shape, right? And so the way might be thought of as the shape of the flow that the world is in. And so if you think about flow, then it's this idea of like things changing shape in relationship to one another. So if you think about like water flowing, for example, right? Like we've got a bunch of water and it's changing shape based on its direction, right? It's moving in a direction. It is flowing in a direction. And the way could be thought of as the shape of that flow. What shape does the flow take? That is the way. So I've mentioned lots of times, but I'll say it again, that the creation event is ongoing. And so Octavia Butler said that God is change. And I have been trying to disprove that for a number of years now, and I just can't do it. I haven't found an angle that, like if we think of God as being this like consistent driver of the world, then the only constant is change, right? It's the thing that just continues always, no matter what. And that change is in fact the creation event, right? So as things interact with other things, then everything changes shape. And that change creates the next iteration of the world. And so by doing that, we can notice that God is change.
Hey, just breaking in here for a second to remind you that you can find a whole bunch of cool stuff at zambonifunk.com. That includes this course, Which Way to Wisdom. It includes merch. This hoodie has become my go-to. I get hella compliments on it. Every day I go out in it, I get at least 2 compliments in it. It's dope. You can be fly as hell as well the same way. So go to zambonifunk.com for either the course or the merch. There's a course on astrology fundamentals that I'm super proud of. I think that it is an excellent way to begin your study of astrology. You can get astrology readings if you don't feel like going through all that bullshit and you just want me to read it for you. I got you, boo-boo. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff there. Also, Spotify, Tidal, Pandora, Apple Music, wherever you get your music at, there's a whole bunch of cool ass Zamboni Funk music. Hopefully there will be new music coming soon in the next month or something like that. Let's hope so. Wish me luck on all that.
So then we come to this question of like, what are we going to do in the world, right? And to me, the foundational thing in the world could be thought of as question. And in fact, part of this comes as a reaction to conventional or traditional religions. So we start off in this place of like being associated with traditional religions and stuff, right? And then, so like, I came up in a Christian background, right? So in that place, then personal inquiry was discouraged, which is to say that like, if you go in and be like, well, this doesn't make sense. What about this? And like start to ask questions in this kind of way, then the church tends to discourage that kind of thing. And so the church likes to be in the position of having the capital A answer to whatever is going on, right? And because the church has the answer, then that lends power to the institution. And so a bunch of folks have started to see through that institutional capacity for power by quashing all of the possible questions where there are cracks in whatever, in like the sort of like wall of the institution of the church, right? And so because of that, then like that insistence on having the right answer, that is ultimately a fatal flaw of the church that we've seen. We see it now. We see it in the decline of conventional and traditional spirituality and religion because lots of folks have been shut down for questioning, and so then the church just like can't function anymore. But what if the Most High exists as an open question? I think that the we could look at the universe, which is sort of like going about existing in the world as sort of operating from this foundational principle of being like, well, what would happen if, and then seeing what would happen if that were to happen. And then that turns around and leads to like, okay, so if this has happened, then well, what would happen if we, and then it continues again, and then you reach a new state, and then you're like, okay, well, what would happen if, and so it just continues. And so that's like the whole cosmos exists to fuck around and find out. And I think that that is a very appropriate way to think about the way that the cosmos functions. Not that there is, like, because the cosmos is not knowable in its entirety, then the cosmos goes about finding things out across all of time. Just like what would happen if it were this way? And then you try it out and see what happens, and you fuck around and you find out. And by you, I mean everything all the time. Everything all the time is fucking around and finding out. And that could be thought of as the foundation of the cosmos, right? And if that is the foundation of the cosmos, then perhaps the question itself is sacred. And if the question itself is sacred, then maybe the right way to navigate the world, the best way to the most, and by best or right, what I mean is like the most effective or optimal way of living in the world is to center the question, right? So it's this idea that like I don't have the capital A answer. I don't know what the right thing is necessarily, but I know that I can become less wrong by asking good questions. And by asking good questions, then maybe I can come into a kind of harmony or alignment with the way, because the way itself is questioning, right? It's this idea that like, answers are static and questions are changeable. They're if you follow a line of inquiry, then like it leads you on a path, on a road, we could say, and it that path is continuous. Even once you have an answer, then the answer begets a next question, and then you just continue along the way, right? And so, and that it to me mirrors the way that the cosmos actually functions, like it's the ongoingness of reproduction even, right? Like this, like, well, what would happen if we got together and tried this new thing, this new way, and then the new way shows up, and then it's like, okay, well, what would happen if we combined it in this way and in that way and in this way, and then all types of new things continue along that road, right? So a line of inquiry begets ongoing creation. And since we can see that ongoing creation does exist, that's like it, there can't be a beginning and there can't be an end. It's all ongoing always. We can just see that there's no like the way that time functions is not a line, but rather a cycle or a set of many cycles. The reason why it feels like a line is because the cycles don't overlap in the same way all the time, right? So like we've got the you could think of like the moon cycle, for example. It's like a 28, 29 day cycle, and but every time it does that, then everything else has changed also. So it's not just the one cycle, but many cycles are operant at any given moment. And so so because the cycles are different, because there are so many cycles, the time feels like a line, even though it is set up as many cycles, right? So anyway, time is a cycle, and as such is always ongoing. And because of that ongoingness, then maybe we can notice that question could sit at the center of the world, of the center of the cosmos, like the way, like everything sort of like flows out of question. And so if that's true, then maybe we can do questions instead of answers, and maybe that can be a better, more meaningful way of navigating the world. So Where does it come from though? What's going on? Like where does this come from? So I think that it is useful to think of the metaphor, the dream, and the sea of potential as a kind of starting place. Now, there could be no starting place because it's all circular, it's all cyclical, but let's start. You got to start somewhere. So let's start in the primordial sea of potential, the blackness of the waters, right? So like in the Genesis creation event, then it starts with it doesn't even start with nothing. It starts with a sea of blackness, right? And so it's that sea, and I like the idea of a sea because first it's water, and so water is the kind of like wellspring of life to begin with. Also the wellspring, right? Like the wellspring is a water metaphor to begin with, but then it's this, if you look at the sea, then it's like constantly moving and shifting and changing, and there's waves and stuff, and like and it's colliding all up into itself, and it's like moving around, and it's formless, but also like takes the shape of its container and all. Like the sea of blackness is a great place to begin. And in this place that we might think of dream as being the the most prominent way of consciousness, of seeing the world, of thinking of things. Like dream is the primary way in that space. So there are these ideas or metaphors or symbols will just sort of like come up. That's why I use the wellspring metaphors. Like they just kind of come up and you don't know necessarily where they come from, but they do arrive. And when they show up, then there is this, then that idea moves forward action, right? And so let's go back to the idea of like, I want to walk across the room. And so I'm like walking across the room. Well, the reason I'm walking across the room is because I wanted to in the first place. I got up because I had the idea in my head to go over there, right? And I wouldn't go over there if I hadn't had the idea first. It had to come from inside. I had to have this idea that it would be better to go over there. I need a fork, and the fork is on the table over across the room. So I got to get from here to there. And so because I need the fork, because I want the fork, because it's inside of me to think of a fork, and I know that there's a fork over there, then that is going to get me across the room. I wouldn't go across the room if it were not for that idea, right? And so the idea precedes every action, and that idea comes from wherever it comes from. Usually I think of that as being like this sea of blackness, or this sea of potential, the sea of dreams and metaphor. So I think of this, like it's useful to think of dream and sleep versus thought and wakefulness, right? And so that's a basic dream, sleep, yin, versus waking, idea, action, yang, right? It's that basic dichotomy that comes with the Tai Chi symbol, right? And so the thing about that is they like feed into one another, right? So like the metaphor, the idea, the dream comes before shape, right? So you like, and so we could think of shape as like me moving across the room because I want the fork, right? And I want the fork because the fork is in a particular shape, which is going to make it possible for me to like eat the food properly or this kind of thing, right? So in order for, and that it's in this shape because somebody had the idea to make the thing in this particular shape because it was going to make it impossible, right? All that, right? So moving my body is in a shape, and I'm changing the shape of my body so that it can move around properly in order to get over there, right? That's in the world of forms, right? That's where we live at. That's where things have this consistency over time and all this sort of stuff, right? That we're in the world of forms, but the idea comes from this other place, from the wellspring. And the wellspring of ideas gives me the idea to move my body in a particular way. But then what we can notice is that Later, I'm going to go to sleep again. And when I go to sleep and I enter into the dream space and the wellspring of potential, and I'm in this sea of dream, then what I have experienced in the world of forms comes with me and then informs the dream that I have, right? So anybody who's ever seen a movie and then they dream about the movie, or read a book and you dream about the book, or you have an interaction with a person or whatever, right? Those things follow you into the dream space. And then that colors what goes on in the dream. And then when it's time to be in the world of forms again, and it's time to uh, do stuff and act and change the world as you see fit, then you will see fit based on the dream that you had, which the dream came from the last time you were in the world of forms, right? And so again, we're in this cycle, and there is no beginning to the cycle. But because we exist in the world of forms here, in this place where shape is the main thing that's going on, then it's helpful to think of metaphor as being the beginning. It's the thing that drove us to this place where we're in the world of forms now. Now, if we were disembodied spirits, then perhaps we would think of the world of forms as the thing that precedes where we are now. If you exist in this place that is the sea of potential, the ideas and this sort of stuff, right? If we think about, disembodied spirit, or you could maybe think of God as coming from this place or something like that. Ideas in general, like the idea that people don't have ideas, ideas have people, right? And so it's this idea, which is a Jungian idea, and it's that the idea is itself a living unit, right? And so if I were an idea, if my living unit was as idea, then I would be part of the dream. And if I were a part of the dream, then I might think of the shape as being the thing that came before. Doesn't really matter. Only it matters because where we are right now is in the world of forms. And so what came before that? Well, the dream came before that, and then the world of forms, and then we kind of head back, right? So it's this ongoing cycle of things, right? So the dream gives way to shape. This is information. Okay, ladies, now let's get information, right? It's this idea of, and so information is like terrible. And I'm gonna do a whole module on information and how to deal with information. But so information is a terrible thing to define, because it's the thing that gives you shape. So, form, it means shape, and in form, it means to like take in and become shape, right? And ation just means that like it has been made into the form, right? So it's just form. Information is the stuff that gives you shape. And so the dream proceeds into becoming a form. The dream informs the reality. And so then the flow, the change that happens from that is like, I'm in a certain form, and then I go about changing the world based on the way that my form interacts with the world. And the world also has forms that I interact with, and they interact with me. And that all like works out how we do stuff, how we exist in the world. And then that existence turns around into an next dream, and change. By changing my relationship to all the other stuff that exists, then stuff happens. Then we can think of that as occurrence or life living. And then that goes on to shape the whole, the next dream, which goes on to shape how we do, like which ideas come up in the next iteration and all this, right? So it just like turns around and around, and always like that's like the idea of sleep, wake, sleep is the same metaphor as to how ideas become action, become next ideas. It's like all in this cycle. And so this cycle is continuously happening at scale. Whatever scale you're at is the scale where this takes place. And it's going to look different in different ways. It's the difference between day versus night, and wake versus sleep, you know, and even those things, like there are nocturnal animals that exist, right? Some animals are wakeful while it's dark outside and sleepy when it's light outside, right? So it's not necessarily like we humans are diurnal, but it's not necessarily tied to light and dark, but there is a cycle of light and dark, and there is a cycle of up and down, or wakeful and sleepy. And so it's important to remember that those things feed into one another always. And that is the way. That's the way that the world comes into being. Or, yeah, the way that the world comes into being. The forms that currently exist because there were ideas that pushed them into being this way. And being this way changes the ideas that will come next. And so that's part of the reason why it's so important for us to consider which ideas we have now and how we want to think about things, because that literally creates the next reality by informing the dreams, giving shape to the dreams. Man, information is such a weird space. This is what I mean about like mystery. You know what I mean? Like the mystery, like it all becomes super intertwined and entangled. And that's part of the reason why I always say that I don't know what I'm talking about, because I clearly don't. But there are patterns that are recognizable, and that's what we're trying to do here, right? So this leads to the idea of consciousness and wakefulness, right? So that is, you know, consciousness as we know it is strange and unknowable. No one knows what consciousness is, but you know it as it is different from unconsciousness, right? So let's think about it for a little bit. So I think of consciousness as developing as a response to stimulus, right? So you're in the world and there's stuff happening in the world, and that stuff interacts with you. Let's say the wind blows, right? So the wind blows and it makes you feel a certain kind of way. Maybe it makes you feel cold. And so then your response to that stimulus might be to shrink up or to start or to like try to make yourself warm in some kind of way, right? And so that action that you take over a certain period of time turns into a situation where you're making decisions where you're like, okay, the wind is blowing, maybe the wind is blowing from that direction, and so maybe I can erect a structure that will block the wind, and so I will be less cold as a result of that, right? And so what we're really looking at is choices. So there is stimulus in the world, there's stuff that's happening, and it makes me feel a certain kind of way. And because I feel that kind of way, we can maybe divide the way that I feel into ways that I want to feel and ways that I don't want to feel, right? So if I'm cold, I'm colder than I want to be. And so I feel chilly and I want to warm up, right? Or, you know, maybe something smells delicious. Maybe it smells tasty and I'm hungry and I want to go and get some of that, right? So because I have noticed that there's something that smells good, then I want to move toward that thing, right? So we might think of a yes and a no as basic like feeling responses, right? And then from that feeling response develops over a certain period of time a sense of choice. I want to head toward the thing and I want to head away from the other thing because that's because I think that it's going to do me better to do that, right? And so then so the thing about that is that much of that works automatically. So, you know, so we might think about like single-celled organisms as being driven by stimuli, right? As being driven by stimuli that it likes or it doesn't like. And it's going to move toward the things it likes and away from the things that it doesn't like. But there isn't necessarily the sense of choice in that as much as like, you know, it just like kind of does the thing. So this is differentiated from someone who has a choice and then can make decisions based on like longer term, like the time horizon changes, right? So, and I think about this a lot. So the way that I think that trees have a kind of consciousness. I think that plants have a kind of consciousness. You know, I think that mind is distributed throughout the world, throughout the universe, the cosmos, in varying capacities. And so I think that I think the closer that you get to automatic function, the more that it feels like a dream. And and this is part of the reason why I think of like the wellspring of dreams, right? Like dreams come unbidden. They just sort of like come up out of the ground or wherever they come from, and then you have them. And then they're out here and you're like kind of just like in the space and you're just kind of out there floating around in it, right? But then once you get to wakefulness and consciousness, you start to sort of change your habits based on what you think good outcomes are going to ultimately look like. So I tend to think that sunflowers are a nice example, right? They're called sunflowers because they like go and they want to face the sun. And so wherever the sun is, then they're going to face that direction, you know, and the sun moves and the sunflowers will move with the sun. They're just going to like follow the sun around, right? And so there's something about that that's kind of automatic, right? Like they feel the light of the sun and they're like, yeah, more of that, like follow that. I don't get the sense that sunflowers are actively making a choice as much as it's just kind of like out here, it's floating. It is what it is, and I'm feeling they're feeling feelings, and they're like headed toward the feeling that feels good to them. So there is a kind of consciousness there. There is a kind of like they have mind, but I think that that is ultimately closer to dream mind versus wakeful consciousness, which is going to be more in in the space of choice and intention and will, right? So this is maybe, I'm an astrologer, so this might be akin to the way that planets move against primary motion rather than fixed stars, which always move according to primary motion. So primary motion is this idea that like it's created by the rotation of the earth, right? So the earth rotates in a certain direction, and because of that, stuff comes up in the east. It goes across, I live in the northern hemisphere, so it goes across the southern sky and it goes down in the west, and then presumably it goes underneath the earth toward the north, and it comes up in the east another time, right? And so that's primary motion. Stuff, everything follows that. And so all the planets do that, and all the stars do that. And so everything just like comes up in the east, goes down in the west, right? So the thing is that planets move against the grain. So they move in the other direction. So they don't move fast enough that you see them moving against the grain of primary motion, but over a period of days, then you'll be able to notice this. And the easiest way to notice that is by taking a look at the moon, right? So you can notice that where the moon is, if it's a new moon, then you will not see the moon because it's dark. But then as it moves away from the sun, it's going to move away from the sun in the direction that is against primary motion, which is to say that, so like at your first quarter moon, that's when you've got a half moon and it's light on the right side. The right side is going to be closer to the sun, and stuff is going to be moving. So stuff is moving east to west, but on a nightly basis, when you go and you take a look at the moon, the best time to do this is when the sun is on the western horizon. So at sunset, you will be able to notice the moon. So on the night after the full moon, or the new moon, on the night after the new moon, then you might get a little sliver of moon which is a little bit higher than the sun and closer to the east at sunset. When you've got the quarter moon, then your moon is going to be at the noontime point, which is going to be closer to the east than the sun is on the western horizon. And it's going to continue to go in that motion, right? So planets move opposite to primary motion. The reason why astrologers focus on what is going on with the planets rather than what is going on with the fixed stars, you can recall that fixed stars are they are called fixed stars because they maintain their relationship to one another across massive swaths of time, again, over thousands of years. They do move around, but like not on anything close to a human time scale. And so they stay where they are, and they just go around the earth over and over and over, right? They stay where they are relative to one another, and everything else, the sun, the moon, all of the planets in the solar system, move around against the backdrop of fixed stars. So we might think of fixed stars as being kind of dreamlike in their sense of like automation, and planets as being more like wakefulness in that they are intentionally making their own decisions to move against the backdrop of the fixed stars. They move around, they do stuff, they live lives. And for that reason, astrologers will focus on what's going on with the planets because they are analogous to our intentional choice, our will of being in the world, right? It's where the drama happens. And we can think of drama as being the story that takes our lives on a particular kind of journey. And indeed, story is what really matters for us in a lot of ways. Story gives us a frame. It gives us context for where we live. A story is a web of certain relationships across time. So relationships are going to be where shapes are relative to one another, you know? So like there's closeness, there's distance, there is direction, there is velocity. How are things changing where they are relative to one another, right? The direction and shape of changes that takes place over time, that is how stories take place. It's more or less the only way to know something because it gives you context for what's going on. The opposite of that would be the gnosis of everything, right? Like, so that's knowing and understanding all of the stuff that is, right? And that can't be done because you can't see all of it. It's just not possible to do. You can't see the whole thing. I don't think that anyone can. I don't think that there is a creator deity who can, but even in the event that there is a creator deity who can see all of the things that exist, it kind of doesn't matter because what matters is what happens here. Like the drama of life happens here and in relationship to whatever's going on in this life. So it's exactly the same way that you see the fork across the room and the fork becomes your like aim, your focus, your goal. You don't see the cane that's in your way you don't see the cane unless it's in your way because it's obstructing your movement toward your goal. But if it's not, then it's just not a part of this story. You are in relationship to the fork and you're trying to get closer to that fork, right? And so that is the main drama that's taking place here. And so if there is mail sitting on the counter, then that's not really a part of this story. And it doesn't matter that the mail is over there because you are engaged in a different kind of story, right? So, and this happens across time, right? So I started over here. I decided, I had the idea that a fork would be dope, noticed a fork across the room, went over, grabbed the fork, right? That sequence takes place over time. And meaning can be derived from this sequence. Meaning comes from this local space and time. What matters to me is the fork, but what matters to me is only what matters to me. Like the neighbor in the next apartment over doesn't give a shit about me being hungry and trying to eat with a fork, right? Doesn't care at all about that because they are living their own life, and I have no idea what's going on with the neighbor or any of that stuff, right? Because what's meaningful to me is local to me. And so, and for me to know everything would be useless. That would be meaningless because all of it, it's the moral relativism argument that I've made a lot of times. It's like what matters to me colors what I think is meaningful. It's the idea that if like a bear catches a salmon and eats the salmon. Like in a documentary about bears, you cheer. In a documentary about salmon, you frown, right? And so the meaning is derived from which angle you look at things and what's happening in context. And so the story which is the changing relationship of shapes across time. That story gives you a local context from which meaning can be derived. So when we are looking for proper meaning in our lives, then it's important to maintain an idea of scale and context and figure out which story is the story that we're taking place or taking part in. Which story is taking place here, and what would be my best, most appropriate relationship across what period of time in order to achieve my best outcomes. What you do at your scale is you play your role in the story that is relevant to your time and place. You always must participate. And so it's up to you to do a good job playing your role, participating in the wider story that's going on in your local space time. So when we are thinking of ways to navigate, then we might think of morality as being like a way of getting toward best outcomes or achieving optimal outcomes, the achieving the optimal life that you want to live. How do you do that? Well, you figure out what the best relationship is for you to have to your local environment, whatever local environment means to you in this moment, right? So that might be, if I'm trying to find a fork across the room, then there are going to be ways to get to that fork that don't involve stubbing my toe on the furniture on the way there, this kind of thing, right? Or maybe my local environment is my neighborhood, or maybe it's my city, or maybe it's my workplace, or whatever it is, right? It's going to be changeable, but having that kind of context and structure is how we move toward preferred and best outcomes, which might be thought of as a way to deal with morality. I'm going to deal with morality and ethics in greater depth later, but what we might think of as a foundational basis is this idea of harmony, this idea of like being in proper relationship to all the other stuff that's going on here. And so harmony is a musical term, which sort of speaks to like consonance in harmony is this idea of like being in a pleasing relationship to one another. When you play at the same time, then what comes out of that is pleasing. It feels good, right? And so, and it's because of the relationship between those two things as they exist together. And so if what we're looking for is good relationships between me and others, then maybe achieving that kind of consonance, achieving a pleasing interaction between me and other could be thought of as a right way or a moral way of being in the world. Also, oh yeah, but harmony is measured by agreeable, thriving outcomes. That's another good way to think about it as well. And so we'll talk about agreeable, thriving outcomes once we get to the morality module here. So it's important to play the role that is yours and not others, right? Like, do the thing that is yours to do and don't do things that are not yours to do. And try to figure out what the best story is going to be. Is there a better story than the one you're currently living? Is there something that would be like, think about what makes a good story and then think about where you are in relation to that. Could you be living a more dynamic, engaging, exciting kind of life? Would your life make a good story? That's enough. See you in the next one.